Good evening, Jackson Street School. With these familiar, reassuring words, Gwen Agna has been guiding us through a frenzy of recent events that have hammered public schools, shattered communities, and sown fear across the country. This February, in fact, marks a grim anniversary. 2 years ago, on Valentine's Day, the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, led to immediate panic and eventually to a student movement to demand action on the plague of gun violence. On that night, as the news came in, Gwen recorded an unforgettable message that most of us in this room listened to with attention. "Good evening, Jackson Street School," Gwen began. "Please, if your radio or television is on right now, turn it off. We need to shield our children from the events right now." With emotion in her voice, she continued, "We need to protect them every day, and we need to work together to make a better and safer world. Please let us know if we can support you right now. We are here for you and for your children. I send you my love now on this Valentine's Day and every day from Ms. Agna." These words are the origin of tonight's event, an evening assembly, a conversation on public education when the world's on fire. Tonight, Gwen will share her thoughts on the past, present, and future possibilities of public education in an age of anxiety, of climate crisis, of xenophobia, of indifference, and most importantly, of hope. Sharing the stage with Gwen is Vijay Prashad, resident of Northampton, internationally celebrated historian, and this year's writer-in-residence for the 5-college graduate program in history at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Every year, we invite a writer of national prominence to our campus and surrounding communities to facilitate sustained conversation with widely read authors whose historical work engages broad public audiences. Vijay is the editor of 25 More, a journalist with hundreds of articles and reports to his name, frequent commentator for media outlets, and now is the director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, a job which has him traveling the world and talking to, writing about, and working in solidarity with those who dare to organize themselves toward building a world of peace and justice. The titles of a few of his books will give you a sense of Vijay's incredible range of interests: The Karma of Brown Folk, The Darker Nations, The Poorer Nations, Arab Spring, Libyan Winter, Red Star over the Third World, and Keeping Up with the Dow Joneses, Stocks, Jails, Welfare. And I could go on. I'm Jason Morley, a faculty member and graduate program director in the UMass History Department. I would like to welcome you on behalf of our department and numerous community co-sponsors. Here begins a long list. The Jackson Street PTO, Leslie Wilson and Lori Valancourt, the principals of JFK Middle School and Northampton High School, Mackenzie Sullivan and Kim Allure from the Hampshire Regional YMCA, Sarah and the other Y staff who volunteered to supply childcare free of charge, departments and programs from our local area colleges, especially Nicole Walsh and Smith College, Heather Dandy and Pastor Michael Sherry from Edwards Church, Northampton Open Media, the UMass Translation Center, and I would especially like to thank Jess Johnson, the co-organizer of this event and public outreach coordinator for the UMass History Department, Mary Lashway, the graduate program director, and our student workers on hand to assist us tonight. This event could not have happened without the vision and hard work of all those mentioned and many others. Before we begin, a few announcements. Please silence your phones. The bathrooms are, how to describe this, you go out the door in the back, turn and come toward the sanctuary, and the bathrooms are to your right. There's a large kid-friendly space in the basement with, I think, remote live broadcasts of the event. And photography is welcome. Please send us your photographs. The email address is in your programs. Now, let me please invite Mayor Claire Higgins up to introduce Gwen Agna. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. The person who really needs your applause is the current mayor of Northampton. He's the one who's being brave right now. I was really thrilled to be asked to introduce Gwen. I was mayor for almost 12 years, and during that whole time, Gwen was the principal of Jackson Street School, and kids would come to visit me at the mayor's office and say, I would ask them I would ask them, what do you think I do? And they just couldn't really kind of figure it out. Besides, I worked in the White Castle on the corner down there. And I would say, I'm kind of like the principal of the city, right? And they got that. And especially kids at Jackson Street School got that, right? Because the job of a good leader, a community leader, is the job of building community. And that's what Gwen did every year at Jackson Street School. She built community with kids, she built community with parents, and she built community with teachers, all in the furtherance of a better life for the next generation of those children that were in those classrooms, right? So I went there for principal's lunch, which was way more civilized than any meal I ever had as a child. And I went to many assemblies where children were just wrapped in their attention to what was going on that Gwen and her team had put together. And what it made me start thinking about was that building of community. And what is the job of education right now? We're in this time of it where education is measured by yardsticks, reading scores, math scores, graduation, and so on and so forth. But we're not necessarily measuring it by how are we building a community, a respectful, democratic community. And that's what Gwen was modeling right there at Jackson Street School. And all her staff were figuring out how to do with young children, to how do we create a respectful, inclusive, democratic community. And we need more of that, not less right now. And one more thought before I turn the mic over to Gwen is I've always said that the best training to be the mayor was to be an early childhood teacher, which I was for many years. Pick up after yourself. Make sure everybody gets. Some other people might need some. Those kinds of daily life skills, they stay with you, yeah? Gwen started as an early educator. And I think kind of everybody should start as an early educator, because if you start with young children, you don't get too far away from where you need to be when you're talking to grown-ups. Because really, we're all three inside. And so I was just thrilled to be asked to be here and to introduce Gwen, and I'm even more thrilled to listen to what Gwen has to say. And Jackson Street's loss is the city's loss, and she's left some awfully big clogs for the next person to fill. Not too embarrassing.
Comfortable?
Trying to be.
Okay.
Claire,
So
also.
great to be here. Thanks for coming, everybody. And it's my real pleasure to sit with you today.
My pleasure as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had a thought the other day after the primary election in Nevada. I thought that on November 3rd, 2020, in a very tight presidential election, Bernie Sanders ends up winning the presidency. And then I thought, on the 4th of November, Bernie Sanders picks the phone up and calls Gwen Agna and asks Gwen Agna, Gwen, would you replace Betsy DeVos? And then what does Gwen Agna say?
That's what the surprise is.
I'm just practicing with you.
Okay. What do I say? First, First, we get rid of the standardized tests. Sorry.
No, but would you accept the job?
Oh, yes, I
You
would.
would accept the job.
Well, yes, I would.
Wow, that's incredible. Why?
Well, I think that part of the challenge for us educators, especially in this day, is that we are under the, I don't know, power, the agency of others who aren't educators. And I think for a long time we've been suffering for that most people who make decisions in the policies around education aren't educators and don't understand how children learn and how we need to make places safe for them.
I mean, it's a very funny thing in this country. They keep saying that, you need to have people who understand business
Yes.
in government. But they don't seem to take other specialities seriously. Like, you don't need an educator to run education. You can have Betsy
Right.
DeVos.
Right.
Or actually even Annie Duncan.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So your first move would be end standardized testing. That's pretty incredible, I think. What would that do?
That would free up the teachers to do what they think is the right thing to do for children. I think that the curriculum frameworks and the standards that we have are good ones, but I think the challenge and the feeling of compromise is trying to make sure that all students meet a certain standard, whether they're English language learners or they have a disability or they just aren't ready to take a test. And I think that if we were able to teach without that pressure on us, I think it would make a big difference in schools.
I read a study from the University of Missouri. It's a long survey that they did of kindergarten to fourth grade teachers. And 93% of the teachers said they were stressed, highly stressed, actually, highly stressed. That struck me. Firstly, it's a very common thing. I think that most people who work in the service sector would answer stressed. I don't think it's particularly marked for elementary teachers. But you would say that the standardized testing is one of the big.
Yes, I think it is one of the features. And I think it'll be interesting because the school committee will be getting the budget Thursday night. And one of the slides in the budget is about the stress that Northampton teachers feel. That was found from the survey that they were given. So it's definitely a local issue as well.
I mean, the question of standardized testing has, I think, a lot to do with, what education is about. And I was really struck by some of the rhetoric that surrounds us about education. Why do people need to be educated? There's an assumption that you need education in order to get a job. And I really liked what Claire said earlier about education and democracy. It seems that that's quite far from the general rhetorical landscape in which we live, where there's this language of education, opportunity, job, economy, and so on. I'd imagine that that's really part of what leads to the standardized testing mentality.
Yeah, I think it is that there's sort of a cookie cutter sense that educators should have about what it is that's going to prepare students for the future, whether it's a job or whether it's being a citizen. And I think that it's unfortunate that that is where all the eggs are in that basket, because I think there's so many things I know at our school that we've been able to see that shows how students can become citizens and they can understand their responsibility as citizens and feel some power about that. And I think that when it's foisted on them in a way that doesn't have their investment or their engagement or anything that has to do with what they believe, then it's so divorced from what we think we should be doing.
But give us some examples of that. I mean, how does the early childhood educator inculcate those big words? We live in a country where the president seems not to understand civics, barely to understand democracy. He was in India today, and he did give a speech where he had the great merit of mispronouncing every Indian word, which I thought was almost cute in a way. And he even mispronounced Swami Vivekanand, and then started laughing. I thought that was funny.
Cute.
That was,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy. If I took the mic around and asked you to say Swami Vivekanand, it's not that easy. He said it, he said, Mabakam number, and he started laughing. I mean, in that kind of context, give us some examples of how in these years you've tried to inculcate, democracy, citizenship, the big words.
Well, I think that the school rules of ours inculcate that because they're the big ideas. And as you bring up our president, I did want this opportunity, since the Gazette chose not to publish it for some reason, and I will still find out. But speaking of the world on fire, we were very hopeful about the election in 2016. We did a big campaign. We showed the students how they could vote. We had a voting station. Everyone felt that their voice meant something and would be a way to express their needs for our country. It was a shock, like for all of us. It was a shock that President Trump was elected. There was a lot of trauma the next day because there are a lot of students at our school that are undocumented. There are students from the LGBTQ community who felt that their worlds might be turned upside down. There was just a lot of consternation. And as we did with what Jason talked about after Parkland, we come together. We have assemblies. We have an assembly after Parkland. We had an assembly after 9/11, 2001. And we had an assembly after President Trump was elected. So I wrote a letter to him to read to the school. And it goes like this. Dear Mr. President, I write as the principal of an elementary school in Northampton, Massachusetts called Jackson Street School. I did actually send this to him. On behalf of the 350 students and 65 members of staff, we are a school that has a growth mindset and a set of rules that guide us in our days. Our rules are be safe, be kind, be respectful, try your best, play fair, and have fun. We have listened to your words and have heard about the things that you have done in your life. Some of us are worried that you say things and do things that would be against the rules of our school. We want you to know that it is important to us that the kind of community we have at Jackson Street is also the kind of community that we have in our town, in our state, in our country, and in our world. We ask that you think about this as you learn how to be the President of the United States of America. Below is a pledge we use at our school. It's not a pledge of allegiance, but a different kind. It might help you think about these things. I pledge to use my words to speak in a kind way. I pledge to help others as I go throughout my day. I pledge to care for our earth with my healing heart and hands. I pledge to respect people in each and every land. I pledge to join together as we unite, big and small. I pledge to do my part to create peace for one and all. Please join us in this pledge. We at Jackson Street work very hard on having growth mindsets. Maybe you can learn to have one too. And you can try hard to be a good president. If you write back to us, make sure you answer our concerns. We are here to help you with this. Sincerely, Jackson Street School. We did not hear from him. When we wrote to President Obama, we did hear from him. It was kind of a form letter, but anyway, we were disappointed not to hear from him.
Talk a little bit more about the growth mindset, because some of these words can come into your head, but you don't have any concrete sense of them.
Yes.
It's a growth mindset. What does that mean? How does one think about children, growth mindset, civics? I mean, I'll tell you why I'm asking you this.
Yeah.
I think people are upset by the level of anger that is there in societies around the world. I mean, the far right, I think it's their sensibility to be angry, yelling, screaming, burning tiki torches, looking scary, and so on. I think people of a different disposition, different sensibility, perhaps on the left or liberals or whatever, have a problem being outraged because they don't want to look angry. So at the same time as one wants to be respectful of others,
Mm-hmm.
how do we learn to be outraged without
Mm-hmm.
being offensive?
Yeah. Wow. I think at the student level, and hopefully it would be for the adults, we have to learn to use our words in effective ways that keep a conversation going, that don't shut down the conversation, don't alienate, don't disrespect in the moment. And I think that there's been some work, Loretta Ross at Smith has been talking about, which I think some of us at Jackson Street have been thinking about, that there's really a calling out culture that has developed. And it's the anger, there's calling out when people are driving their cars and they're screaming and giving the finger. There's a calling out, I think, on the left as well, that shuts down the conversation. And Loretta Ross talks a lot about calling in, trying to bring people in and dialogue to enable those conversations to have, so that I do believe that if people feel heard and people are included and not called out on things, that they maybe will reduce some of that anger and maybe come to the table. Of course, with students, that's our job, is to help them do that in every moment and every day with each other, with the adults that they're frustrated with their families, with their situations outside. Again, I think the listening and the acknowledging and the validating are so critical to maybe reducing some of that anger and the calling out stuff.
But let me pursue this a little bit with
Okay.
you, because I mean, I'm thinking about the young people who are upset by, say, the catastrophic climate change
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
Or that are, people are upset about how workers are treated in our society, in this town, for instance, dishwashers and people who are doing the cooking and so on. There's appalling stories come out of how treatment of workers, it gets revealed, and then some quick reforms happen, it disappears from the news,
Yeah.
and then we all go out to dinner and it's all fine. And so you feel angry and you feel upset, and the upset somehow becomes the main range of your emotions. So a lot of young kids get upset or worried or feel, the world is going to come to an end, but what's the outlet?
Yes.
And what was so powerful is that when young people went on the street and they sort of took upset into activism. I mean, shouldn't that be such a core part of early education, is to teach young people to take upset into politics?
Yes, into action. I
Yeah.
think, really, seriously. I think that, again, giving agency, giving permission for students to have a voice, I think I hope that if people are thinking about our school and the adults in the school, that we are trying to always acknowledge the voice of the students. They're the ones who should be in charge. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. We need students to really think about these things for themselves, and we are their guides to it. I think that, I know that a parent said to me one time that her child came home one day and said, we only have 40 years left on Earth. And she said it very matter-of-factly, and the parent was very upset because she thought, how are we going to have a world, and how is my daughter going to grow up with that attitude? But I do think that if we continue to give voice and give action steps that we can developmentally, I think as an early childhood educator, the action steps we can take might not be that we're going to change the rules or we're going to change City Hall, but we might change something at school. So the students will write to me all the time about what they want to change, and I welcome that. I can't always do it, but I always go to them and I say, I got your letter. I heard that you said that you really wanted to have strawberry milk in the lunchroom. And I really need to tell you why we don't have that anymore, but I need to acknowledge and respect the fact that you believe that and you really are feeling that you can come to me and say that. When we mentioned the principal's table, which is a Friday event at our school, that I'm always amazed by how much students will just say about what they're thinking and what they believe. And I hope that that's part of the culture and the climate that we've established, all of us at our school, that has to do with growth mindset. Growth mindset gives you flexible thinking. That's mainly for me why we want to have a growth mindset, so that we can maybe take somebody else's perspective. We can learn from other people. We don't have to be rigid in our thinking. A fixed mindset is the opposite. And if, I'll get on my soapbox now about this, but growth mindset has also been used as a tool to oppress, I believe, because I think many, many students have a hard time having a growth mindset when they have outside factors that limit their thinking, either because of economics or class or race, so that for us as educators, as white privileged ones especially, to say, oh, you just have to have a growth mindset about that. You're never going to have a job, you're never going to, your father's in prison and all that, but just, be flexible and think about those things. I think it's a real balance that we have to achieve for our students and know who they are.
I mean, I'm not going to argue with you about the growth mindset. By itself, that's okay. But one of the interesting things about these principals tables or, people writing to you, I mean, it's really interesting that in colleges in the United States, like I've been at UMass, well, it's already seems like a month, but it's just been 24 hours, but it's a lot of work. Anyway.
It's a state college,
Well, yeah, I'm going to come back to this thing about salaries and so on. What's it? I wrote it down, the hashtag, red for ed. We'll come back to that.
That's why I've got my clock.
Yeah, that's important. But one interesting feature is that in colleges in the United States, you don't actually have political unions on campus. The opportunity to learn collective action is not really there. In colleges around the world, the student unions have elections where people are in political parties essentially. And they fight on a slate of issues, and they're very contentious, and students are out there campaigning on the colleges. And what happens is that the college becomes a real laboratory for political collective action. And I find that just not that here, that young people don't learn how to be collective. And I don't think it's intuitive to be politically collective. It's equally intuitive to complain. I need strawberry milk. Don't complain to me. Organize your class, come into my office and stop me from going to the assembly.
Yeah.
And say, unless you give me strawberry milk, Miss Agna, you're not going to be able to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I think that eviscerates the general tenor of politics. It creates a lot of individual anger rather than sort of collective engagement, And I wonder in an elementary school, how could one teach collective action?
Well, I wish I could get my colleagues up here because I think we do that a lot. We've had, I just attended a fourth grade opinion writing publishing party where they stood at the podium and had very strong opinions about things and what they were going to do to achieve those things. One was that they did not like the fact that we had plastic cups in the cafeteria. It often circles around the cafeteria, but that we fortunately have water available, and if they want to have a drink of water, they can get a cup, but that these cups are only recyclable, but they're not compostable. So there was an outrage expressed about that. But then action was taken because I said to them, what can we do about that? We can get water available if everybody brings a water bottle. So right now there's a campaign to get loose change, to get a water bottle filler for the cafeteria and water bottles to do that. So that I think that you really do have to turn it around for students. I had one other at the podium was about Pearson. And there was a student who really spoke very vehemently about Pearson is in charge of every testing that we have in our schools and was outraged about that. And he quoted me because he interviewed me before about the fact that we have to spend all the money in one place and we don't have any ways of doing our own testing. And his solution was he's going to start writing some of the tests. And that was fine. I said, think about what you think you should learn in 4th grade and see if we can write a test that we can share with Pearson. I do think you're right that we need to encourage them and have sort of a laboratory for action in schools. I agree with you. I went to college in England. There was a student union. You know, there was so much activity that, again, gave voice at that level. And I think that that's something that we need to do starting in preschool, for sure.
I'm really interested that the student picked up on Pearson
Yes.
because, I mean, this is one of, you know, I don't know if people know that about 85% of students in schools in the United States go to state schools. Like Jackson Street, which is a state school.
Right.
85% of students essentially are in socialist education. But we don't think of it like that.
Right.
Only 10% are in private schools and 5% in charter schools. But even in the socialist school system, I mean, that's what it is.
It is.
Even in the socialist school system, there's so much stealth privatization.
Yes.
You know, Pearson runs the testing and somebody runs the this, and, you know, Apple and Pearson got over $1 billion contract from the city of Los Angeles for tests on iPads. I mean, over $1 billion.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yes. Well, I think it goes back to the fact that educators aren't in charge. And I think, you know, Arnie Duncan and what's her name, DeVos? I forgot it's DeVos. I'm sorry. I don't even want to say her name. But throughout the years, it's never been an educator, really. And I think that was different in England as well. The people who were in the Ministry of Education were educators, and they had been preschool teachers or teachers. So
We learned that from the Harry Potter movies.
Oh, you did? Okay.
All the wizards who taught wizardry were wizards and so on. They had the
Yes.
Ministry of Wizardry. And
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't see why here, I don't understand why you need to give Apple a $1 billion contract for testing made by Pearson. I mean, why can't you use paper and pencils and have the teacher make the test up?
Because we're a capitalist society. You know, it's socialism in terms of a public school system, but everything is based on profit, and I think that that is what drives it. I also think that the status of teachers is not where it should be in terms of who's in charge and who's leading. I don't think there would be, my husband is a physician, and I've said to him before, would the public weigh in on whether he was going to do an angioplasty on someone? The public weighs in on us all the time about what we're supposed to be doing, and they have no clue, really, at any level about what we need to do as educators.
And they don't even finance it. I mean, I was looking at the numbers today, and I'm really going to push this socialist thing quite hard.
I'm fine.
You know, UNESCO, which is the UN Children's Agency, says that a government should spend about 6% of its GDP on education. That's a fair number. The United States spends 4.9% of its GDP on the socialist education sector. They announced that it's 6.1%, but that's because they add up all the private spending. If you take the private spending out, it's 4.9%. I just want to give you one other statistic, and you know, you might roll your eyes or whatever, but this is a real number. The government of Cuba spends 12.9% of its GDP on education. And I can tell you, I've interacted with a lot of Cuban teachers, and they have a completely different attitude toward, I mean, there's a lot of problems in Cuba because of the embargo. But the teachers are people highly motivated to educate the children of that island because, you know, they have resources. Even in that context, where their budget is a slender thread of the $3 trillion US budget, most of it to the military. So, I mean, when you become the Secretary of Education,
Certainly. I will do away with the defense spending and put it in the education department. Yes,
good luck
for sure.
with that.
Good luck with that. Well, again, it's back to profit, for sure. It's not as profitable to be an educator, for sure.
Yeah, it's that old saying, right? You know, if they could have bake sales to get the, you know, F-16 or whatever it is, it's simply not going to be
No.
the case.
No, it's not. And it was shocking for me because I was able to go to other countries and look at education. I did go to Cuba, went to China and Japan and Myanmar, and of course England. And the status of teachers there, for the first thing, is really much higher, and the values placed on educators is just so different from the United States. And
What do you think is the status placed on teachers in the United States? Like, what does it feel like for a teacher? Because it seems like the kids love you and respect you.
That's a really good question. I think we have to earn that. I think that that's our job, that we really do need to show that we are thoughtful people that are interested in learning and interested in thinking about children and how they learn. So I think that that's the job that educators need to have, and I think I can say this with real confidence. I think that the teachers at our school really do. They're reflective, and they're real scholar practitioners. And that is important, and I think that is what brings the respect and brings the elevation of status. I think, unfortunately, there hasn't been that kind of investment in teacher education in this country. There hasn't been an investment in salaries so that people are attracted to education. I think that I feel, and I think the teachers at our school are people on a mission. I think they really have a vision that they are doing something that is going to change the world, and is maybe one student at a time or students at a time, but I think that's the reward we get out of it. But I also think that it's really shameful that we don't get the other rewards that other professions get.
But, what are those rewards? I mean, what are those other rewards? Is it the money? Because I see that that's important. I mean, when I looked at the numbers for this, what's the hashtag again? Red for Ed. I don't know if does everybody know the Red for Ed? Right? Okay. I mean, it's one of those things, right? You hear it often that people just don't get paid enough to do what they love doing. And so if they love doing it, they can be taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And, you know, because they're not the kind of people who are going to say, pay me more, you know, because they love what they do. And there's a way in which people get taken advantage of. So the Red for Ed, it seemed to me, was the opposite thing, saying that, well, I love teaching, I love my students, but this is ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think there are movements all over the country now saying that, and teachers going on strike and saying no more. I think that that has been a very exciting change in our country, and I think that there's been attention paid now, and that states are having to pony up, as it were, and pay teachers for the work that they do. But it really needs to start much earlier. I think that early childhood, and I'm on that bandwagon, that, you know, we pay the worst for the children who are probably the ones that we need to pay most attention to, because at the beginning. So, you know, I can't speak totally for the teachers about whether the rewards balance out the fact that they don't get the pay that they should, but I think that in the last 5 years even, and I've seen that teachers are really starting to do more collective action and saying no more. It's really important that they are doing that now.
I mean, the reason I'd like to spend just a few more minutes on this is that there is a way in which, if we fight for the things we believe in, we are often called utopian or naive or, you know, etc. Like, well, there's just not enough money. And I remember the teachers' strike in Northampton last year. The issue of budgets keeps coming up. You know, there's just not enough money. But that's just not true in a society like this. It's such a rich society. It's not that there's not enough money. It's that governments are not accessing the money. You know, there's money. There's something obscene about a society, I think. I'm sorry, I'm being a little judgmental about the society I live in, but there's something obscene about a society where we allow the very rich to keep their money and then to donate money out of the goodness of their hearts to us. I don't want your donation. I want you to pay taxes. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward, you know.
Yep.
I don't want to feel, I mean, why should we feel grateful to the rich?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm not grateful to them.
Yeah, 1,000 points of light.
It's a very strange attitude. And then, you know, they donate a building to a college, or they donate a building even sometimes to schools, private schools, whatever. And then everybody has to tiptoe around them. It's a terrible cultural failure. You know, so when we talk, I suppose what I was also asking you about the status of teachers. I mean, who cares about Jeff Bezos? I don't care about him, his life, or, you know, he wants to, his ambition in life is to be the first trillionaire in the world. That's laughable to me. It's ridiculous. I want to come to why people need to be educated, because it seems to me that the culture is teaching people that your ambition in life should be to make money. I mean, I remember this when my children were in your school, and you know, we all sort of dance around this thing about parents coming to the principal and saying, I want to be in this class and that class, and starts in kindergarten, and there's anxiety if you're in the wrong stretch of teachers, your child won't become a trillionaire. You know? And actually begs the question, Gwen, what is education about?
Oh.
It's the big question.
That is the big question, yeah. I think, what is education about? Well, I think the important thing is that we're all together, having it together. And I think, I'm glad to hear the statistics of children in this country, the 85% go to socialized situations. Socialists. And are socialized in socialists. But I guess I would go back to where I started, which was not in public education. I'll be very open about that. I had a hard time thinking about public schools when I saw them when I was thinking of being a teacher. In high school, I really did want to be a teacher, and I saw that the schools really didn't promote thinking. I guess that's basically it. They really didn't have students at the forefront, and I wasn't sure because I hadn't really done a lot of study, but that was kind of an intuition I had about the fact that I think the students needed to think. And so I fortunately went to England, and I was in England during the British infant school heyday, which the schools were really designed around child development, and Jean Piaget and Erikson, and really were thinking about how children learn rather than the curriculum that they were going to foist on the children or the bulletin boards that they were going to make. And I was really excited to learn to be a teacher that way, because I felt that that really was the way we needed to think about education, about who the learners were. When I came back to this country, I still saw the public schools in a way that I wasn't going to fit, basically. And so I spent most of my teaching in lab schools in Ohio and in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. And because they were more open to early childhood, and they were more open to how children learn, and I could be part of research, and I could be part of mentoring teachers. I think that we are, fortunately, when I got a job for this, in this district, I was given the early childhood coordinator job to try to help the elementary schools become more developmentally appropriate, to think about child development and learners versus the curriculum that we were going to put on them. And I think that in the time that I have put my toe into the public schools, we've seen that. I think the teachers are really thinking about who their students are in front of them and how those students learn and what are the best ways to do it. So I think that's, for me, what education is. It's about what people want to do, what they need to do, how they learn to think, how they learn to navigate the world, how they talk to each other. All of those things have to be the education. It's yes. I think it's a dynamic situation. I think it's one that has to have people wrestling with ideas and critically thinking about things, and not just being given information to regurgitate on tests. And unfortunately, I think that we're still stuck in this world in doing education that way. I think often it doesn't happen until kids get to college, if they're able to go to college, to really start wrestling with ideas. That's why I really feel like I want our kids at our school to be thinking and wrestling and critically thinking about things and turning things over and questioning and always, always feeling like they're the ones in charge.
I mean, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's great. This idea of they're the one in charge and critical thinking and so on, I mean, it would be a good idea just to chart out very briefly, you know, what are the objectives of education? I mean, I'll put it this way. I read a couple of government documents written by this administration, which, you know, explains what education is supposed to be. And this is how they understand it. The word that's used most often in the Betsy DeVos administration is opportunity. And education leads to opportunity. But statistically, this is just not true. You know, when you tell somebody, if you go and get trained after you've been fired at age 50, for instance, if you get retrained, you'll have opportunities. This is actually not true. You're feeding a lie to people. And for this administration, I think that's a pretty good batting average. You know, I don't know, 80% lies, 90% lies, not bad. But what's the alternative to this narrative of education gives your child opportunities, or education gives an adult opportunities? What's the alternative? What do we have to offer in that stead? You know?
Well, it can't be done clearly in isolation. I think that it's a cruel joke to say that education is going to give opportunity, because I don't even, at my fingertips are not, it's not the percentage of students who are not going to have opportunity, but clearly in this country, it isn't something that kids are going to end up having opportunities as a result of school. However, I do think that there is a point to being in a school and being a part of a community and learning from each other, so that you can hopefully do some change as you get outside. But the fact that it's kind of rigged, the system, it's a very rigged system for many, many, many students. And it's part of what makes me saddest, I think, about looking back on my career and looking back on the conversations that I've had with students, when a little girl will say to me, who came to the office one day being sent by her teacher for calling out without raising her hand. And I said to her, "Why don't you raise your hand?" And she says, "Only the kids who read chapter books get called on." And this is not the teachers at Jackson Street now. We've done a lot of work. I've been fortunate to be there as long as I've been, to be able to hire most of the people. And so I don't think that would be anything that would happen, but I think that that is what it is, that the opportunity is not going to be there. So I don't think teachers can be just the educators in the classroom. I think we have to work for the revolution too, outside.
I mean, it is one of the, it's one of the, let's say, downsides of the progressive part of US history, is that so much social engineering is on the backs of children. I mean, why do you need to bus children? Why don't you just desegregate neighborhoods? You know, why should children have to be in buses for 45 minutes, you know? Why don't we stop allowing redlining and, you know, things like that? And it seems that even now, there's so much pressure on teachers to be the salvation of a toxic society that I'd imagine that 93% of high stress comes from the fact that teachers are also social workers, are also revolutionaries, this or that, and it's just wrong. You know, you don't pay the teachers enough, and then you expect them to save society. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. On the other hand, what's the alternative? I mean, I think that's the problem that I find that I come up against. And I think that in some ways, Jackson Street for me has always meant, it is that frothy mix, I often say, of the people that we have in this community coming together to try to figure out if it can work, at least if it can work in a school. If it may not work outside of a school. But I've always, I was given good advice when we came to this town with I was pregnant with Kate, and then we had a first grader by one of the administrators in the central office that just said, don't be fooled, this is not what you see on the outside, even though it was 84 and it was not quite the same as it is now, but the progressive part of this town is part of the town, but it's not all of the town. And I think that unless you do participate in the public schools, you aren't going to see the parts of this town that are existing. And that maybe it is social engineering, but I think it's probably all that we have to do to try to educate our students to learn to be in a world that is as diverse as it is. There's a wonderful article, and I'm not going to read it, but just to refer to it, about what it's called, The Benefits of Sending Your Privileged Child to an Underperforming School, which for me has always been, it's been one of the conversations that I've had with families is, am I sacrificing my child by sending our children to a public school? And a school that's as diverse as it is, that Jackson Street is. And I think this article really speaks to the idea that it is actually better for your child to do that, to be together, even if it's not outside, even if your neighborhoods aren't integrated, if there's segregation everywhere else in your child's world, that the 6 hours that you have in a day that you rub up against everybody and have to figure out everybody, there's just such value in that, and I think that all of us who work at Jackson Street really believe that, as challenging as it is to make it work.
I'm going to spiral back to the young girl who comes into your office, and I'd imagine it's a really difficult thing for a sensitive educator to do. On the one side, you don't want to lie to children. You don't want to say, if you do all this, you're going to do well on the terms of this society. On the other hand, you don't want to demoralize a young person, saying that it makes no difference really in terms of the values of the society. You have to find a way, I suppose, to engage the sensitivity of a young person, give them hope. But that's because the pathway, this whole opportunity language, has individualized success and personalized success. And I want to ask you, in all the years of trying to create different values for young people, I mean, it's obviously a lonely job because this whole society is obsessed with individualized and personal success.
It's very lonely.
How do you teach young people about social success or collective success? And how do you model that for young people?
Well, one of the curriculums we use is through the responsive classroom, which I think has been, for me, one of the things that's helped me think about public schools in a different way than I first was introduced to them, so that it is about building community. It's about investment in each other. It's not about the individual. We can't function if we're not collectively working together. So I do think that is how that informs our practice at Jackson Street, and hopefully in other public schools as well, that we are fighting against the individualization for sure. That seems to be the underpinnings of our culture, and the competition and the sense that you can't have something that is at a collective. It isn't a reward. When I first came to Jackson Street, there were awards for students every year, and I was given the job of choosing the first year of my principalship to choose a first grader who would get the art award, and a third grader who would get an English language award, and a fifth grader that would get the citizenship award, and it went on like that. And they were endowed awards by well-meaning people who wanted those kinds of characteristics to be raised up for the rest of the school, so that the idea was if one first grader got an art award, then that would really make people think, oh, I'm going to do that and get that next year. It's the United States plan. And and I thought, I did it the first year, and as I announced those names, and I looked out at the assembly, and I saw the students looking at me like, is it going to be me? Is it going to be me? And it wasn't going to be them. And I wanted to die. I wanted to just throw it all away and say, we all get an art award, and we all need that kind of support. And so the next year, I went to the school council and I said, we can't do this anymore because I don't think this is valid in education. I believe, like Alfie Kohn, you're punished by rewards. You need to have some intrinsic sense of what is your worth. And so as a council, we decided we would have book awards, and we took the money that those endowed awards were given, and we bought books that represented the family that wanted the art award or the family that wanted the citizenship award, and we continued every year, and we still do. We have the book awards collections and we have pictures of those people that were the people we were going to remember in our lives that represent art or citizenship, and we can think about that together, but we don't have to worry about the competition part. So yes, socializing and socialists and investment in the collective is what I think we have to try, even if we're not going to be able to do it outside of our school walls.
I mean, I think that that's a very interesting example, because I think the award culture is part of the singularization of success. I think it's a big issue in any culture. It's a way to actually fragment working together with people, learning to work in solidarity and so on. How many people in this room are teachers? If you wouldn't mind standing up. There's a lot of teachers. I didn't ask anybody to clap for you, but I think people may have felt guilty because you're all underpaid. And so that was a form of
undervalued.
And undervalued. That was a form of valuation, and a nice one, so that's great. I guess, I really think looking at numbers are important, because they give you a sense of the reality around us. And I was quite surprised, actually, Gwen, to find that in the last 10 years, this last decade, this is Obama to Trump, 1.5 million more students have entered the school system. That means the school system has grown by 1.5 million people, but there's been a loss of 150,000 teachers. That's a really big number. So we had a teacher standing up, but I wonder how many people used to be teachers. And this is because after the financial crisis, there was a deep retrenchment of state funding through the formula and general fund and so on. And schools just cut teachers. 150,000. Now, I also found that there's 3 million teachers in the United States. So that's a lot of teachers.
That's a lot of teachers.
That's about, I think, 1 in 100 people are teachers of all kinds, colleges, schools, and so on. That's a huge constituency of teachers, and then when we think of the value, I think it's maybe important to also talk about the fact that the vast majority of secondary school teachers are women. And I think this plays a huge role in the question of salaries and general valuation. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this has been a feature of your career, of the role of women as teachers and the undervaluation of this profession?
It's certainly is the case, for sure, in terms of the statistics and also what I've seen in education. And it is easy to undervalue women. There's no question about it. I think we see that everywhere in politics, you know, and the question about whether a woman could be a president. I think that we're really struggling with equality of the sexes, for sure. I think that in our school and in our world at Jackson Street, we have been trying to recruit and support men in our world, people of color, people who look like the students. I think that's really critical, that if we can have as many people who look like them that they can then relate to, we can better achieve, I think, the opportunity outside. But I think that this goes back to teacher training institutions. I think it goes back to the recruitment, and it goes back to the salaries. And I think if, you know, traditionally if men are seen as the breadwinners, the challenge of being a breadwinner and a teacher's salary is huge, very huge. And I think that I agree with you about taxes. I think that we have millions and millions of dollars somewhere in this country, mostly in the defense budget, but I think that in the public money anyway, that we don't tax people in the ways that they should be. We have a flat tax in this state. We have challenges around funding public institutions through property taxes. We're faced with the override right now, and it's just unfair that it's going to be on the backs of taxpayers to fund things that should be funded on a graduated level for people who have the income. I mean, it's just insane that we have that. So and I'm really sorry that I support the override because it's all we have, but I really think that we can't be really dismissive of people who question that, because it's really hard to think about paying more taxes when it's not really done fairly for people who can afford to.
Yeah, I'm scared of saying what I would.
You're scared of saying that? Okay.
I just want to say that you said millions. There's at least $32 trillion.
Trillion. Okay, trillion. Yeah.
32 trillion in tax havens.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Bloomberg is worth $50.8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that largely humorless man is going to do with $50.8 billion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how is he planning to spend it? I mean, one of the things he could do is he could fund the New York City public schools.
Mm-hmm.
All he needs to do is write a check. And maybe the school teachers in New York would vote for him for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a good quid pro quo. Why not? 50.8 billion, 32 trillion. I mean, I think, frankly, that a city this size should not have to have overrides.
No.
And I think that the leadership in a city like this should make it a state issue. That we should have mayors and city councilors drive to Boston and not allow the governor to go to the toilet. Block in the governor and say, this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I find it a little insensitive that, I hear friends say, well, it's only $100 a month or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insensitive. There are people for whom that's not an insignificant amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So even the way we have these debates, we talk about modeling civility, but I think the debate is extraordinarily condescending.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that much, and it's to save the schools. Well, I mean, when is the last time people have been outraged at the Bloombergs of the world, really?
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah. Well, I think it's again, the system's so rigged in terms of, I think people accept that and don't. But I also do, and I'm looking out at these public servants here who I know go to Boston and try to get legislation on the ballot or try to get the legislation to support schools in a different way or support public services in a different way by having a tax on money after $1 million or having a tax that's graduated rather than a flat tax. I think that everything is so entrenched that it's very, very hard to get people to move off that one. So on the one hand, I do think that it's important that we understand why people might not want to vote for an override, but I also know that it's the only way, and I know that our public servants are working hard through Boston as much as they can. Joe Comerford, our representatives, are really trying to change the system, but it's big and it's entrenched.
I mean, I suppose this is why people like James Carville and Chris Matthews are basically, collapsing really emotionally on television when confronted by socialism. I thought Chris Matthews had a nervous breakdown on television. And James Carville is ridiculous, I mean, the things that they say. And they keep getting re-invited to the television. Once they've sounded ridiculous, isn't it a good idea? Oh, I forgot, Bill O'Reilly. Said ridiculous things for a generation and got away with it. But I do think that they're afraid that people are no longer, I think, willing to accept this bargain. You keep your money and the rest of us will fight over things like overrides and so on. But you keep your money. And you can keep it in the tax haven, and you can have your 6th house, and that's okay. We won't talk about that.
That's why Bernie is so threatening, I think, because he is really questioning the world order in this country, and I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if people will be able to accept his worldview if he was president. That is huge.
I think you can't really know unless you try.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great gestures of politics is you just have to have the courage to fail. And I think that too often people have not done things because they've been afraid that it won't work. And I think, this is one of those historical occasions where I think it's really a good idea to try to fail. Go all out, try to get all the billionaires' money.
Well, that's a growth mindset.
If they don't let us do it, well, then we know what they're made of.
Right.
But I don't think we should not really censor, but we should not reduce the horizon of possibility.
Right, or sell ourselves short, as it were.
Yeah, we shouldn't reduce the horizon of possibility.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
I have too.
I've enjoyed, actually, I went to Gwen's office a few weeks ago, more than a few weeks ago, and it was in between the million things she does, and she told me about her favorite book, which is called Summerhill. And she pulled out this copy from her shelf. It was a really old book. I went and read it. It's quite illuminating, also frustrating, very frustrating. I read Margaret Mead's review of it. That was interesting. I learned a lot. I've learned a lot from you then and now. I'm very happy to have had this chance. I'm going to leave you now, but I'm going to bring up Nicole Walsh.
Okay.
She's the Jackson Street parent and the coordinator of teacher education at Smith College. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you both for providing such a rich conversation and discussion. Thank you, Vijay. Tonight I'm here with a group of Smith undergraduate students who my back is to you. I'm going to try to position myself this way. Tonight I'm here with a group of undergraduate students from Smith College who chose to spend their January intersession interning in public schools in large cities across our country. They're here tonight to be a part of this discussion, and they'll be joining me back at Seeley Hall a little bit later to reflect on the topics the two of you discussed tonight. When I was inviting them, it was hard for me to predict what the topics of conversation would be.
It was hard for me, too. Because he wouldn't tell me.
or what to assign them as readings to prepare. But the one thing I know about Gwen Agna is that she has a strong moral compass and a clearly defined teacher identity. So I thought that was a good topic for them to think about. When I think about your defined teacher identity, I think about the fact that you literally display many of those values on pins that you wear on a lanyard around school every day, and I was happy to see Gwen wearing that lanyard here this evening. I think your values are embedded in every decision that you make, may it be to respond to a lockdown drill or to answer questions about why a certain flag might be hanging on the flagpole outside of Jackson Street School. It's the belief that a school must be a place that respects children and childhood. A school is a place that must value all families and actively seek to include them in every part of education. And a school that treats teachers as the professionals and intellectuals that they are. That was evident tonight in the conversation. And Gwen, thank you for inspiring us with your words and giving us so much to think about tonight for some of us in the coming days ahead. As a parent of 3 students at Jackson Street School, I want to thank you for all that you've done and all you continue to do. My children feel held, recognized, and valued, and that's the one wish I have as a parent of children at an elementary school. As the coordinator of teacher education at Smith College, I want to thank you for your work as an advisor for our department and for creating a supportive and thoughtful collaborative environment for our students to complete their field work. The entry into the profession via Jackson Street School provides our students with a grounding in developmentally appropriate practice and a sense of hope and urgency, which is my one wish as a teacher educator. So thank you. Your work at Jackson Street School and within the larger community will have a long-lasting impact, and in the coming months, we will look to honor and celebrate your work. I look forward to joining you in May at the Smith College graduation, where we will honor you with an honorary degree for your work in education. I also look forward to joining you on the grounds of Jackson Street School for a tea party with my children to celebrate your retirement. We would also like to honor you through the work of the Hampshire YMCA. I'm going to welcome to the mic Kim Malore and Mackenzie Sullivan, who would like to provide you with something to honor you and your work in the community.
Thank you. So as evident tonight, Ms. Agna has had a tremendous impact on the community here in Northampton and community in general. So we would like to, from the bottom of our hearts, thank Ms. Agna for welcoming the before and after school program at the YMCA into the Jackson Street School community.